Hello. Yes, Sasha was gonna join the call, but it's just gonna be me and Shadowman Studio, and we're gonna be reacting to Mr. Nightmare's Christmas Horror Stories playlist. So let's begin. I'll share my screen.
So we were having our Christmas Eve dinner. Turkey, stuffing, and other dishes that you would expect to get on Thanksgiving night. We don't have a big family. It was my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side of the family. At the time, we lived in a duplex with some guy and his girlfriend on the other side. We never really saw them much. Strangely, we had a door that connected our sides, and no, that's not something that most do.
Can I actually do a split screen? A split screen. But if I do play it, then it won't do anything. I can only play it when it's on full screen. It is on. Now is it on? Okay. Okay, should I put on full screen? Okay.
Duplexes have. It had a very unique kind of lock though. It had to be unlocked from both sides to be opened, and it could open in either direction.
What did you say? Yeah, there's 7. So let's do like different parts. Yeah. Like 2 or 3 maybe.
I only saw it open once before the two moved in, ever since the door had been locked, at least on our side. While we were sitting at the dinner table eating, the doorknob to the door that separates the sides of our duplex twisted and turned before the lock would block it. It was not accidental, as it was going on for at least 10 seconds. My dad got up and walked over to the door, placed one hand on the lock and one hand on the doorknob. "You need something?" There was no answer. He unlocked our side of the door and swung it open. Their side of the duplex was completely pitch black. It seemed as if nobody was home. It was only about 6 o'clock, and we were certain we saw them leaving earlier. Me and my dad went to check out the window, and their car was gone too. Being good neighbors, we assumed the worst, that there may have been an intruder, so me, my dad, and my uncle went to the other side to investigate. We flipped on all the lights and checked every corner and every crevice of the small first floor. Then we heard a thud and a crack from upstairs. It was pressure on the floorboards. I was freaked out, so I stayed behind while my dad and uncle ran upstairs. I felt my heart skip a beat when a huge commotion erupted from upstairs, before the scream from my uncle echoed across the duplex even to the other side as my whole family got up from the table now. Moments later, my dad came rushing down with my uncle beside him, with his hand covering his lower shoulder or chest area. There was a stab wound. We all hurried back to our side of the apartment and locked the door. We dialed 911 and simultaneously heard rapid stomping coming from the other side, and then heavy banging and ramming into the door to the point where there were small chips and cracks forming. We could hear the grunting and screaming of the man as he rammed into the door. My other uncle and my dad each grabbed kitchen knives. I armed myself as well. They told all of us to stand back while they waited by the door. Thankfully, the man on the other side gave up before the door gave in, and we heard him exit out the front door. We watched through the window, and we all saw his face as he ran through the snow and turned to see us through the glass. He took off in his black Honda Civic down the slushy roads. It doesn't end there. The following year, the same neighbors still lived there, and they seemed to be having a Christmas get-together with a few people. By chance, I was looking out my bedroom window being a sketchy snoop when I recognized one of their guests to be the same man who had allegedly broken into their side of the duplex. When I told my dad, he agreed and we approached them about it. He denied any knowledge of what we said, and even our neighbors defended him, saying he was from out of state. There was nothing we could do for proof, but we knew one thing. Those neighbors, for whatever reason, set that up. We moved out about a month later after our newgrown fear of those neighbors became too much.
The question is, should we trim out the ads? What? Yeah, it says true in the title.
This happened when I was only 5 years old. It was Christmas Eve night, meaning I guess it was technically Christmas, and I had awoken at probably 3 a.m. or something. I walked downstairs to the living room out of my little boy curiosity to see if Santa had delivered any presents yet. The tree was full of presents underneath already. I was so happy. Santa had come already. But what was this? There was someone in the kitchen going through the fridge. I remember stepping into the kitchen and seeing a really tall man going through the fridge chugging a milk carton. When he spotted me, he put the carton back in the fridge and shut the door. He then put his fingers on his lips to tell me to be quiet. Are you Santa? I asked him. Yes, I am, he told me quietly. He walked past me, patted me on the head, and stepped into the living room next to the tree. I don't know what I was thinking, even at 5 years old, as he wasn't wearing anything even resembling Santa. He looked around at all the gifts. I thanked him for all the presents as he began picking up the bigger boxes. I remember being confused, and I'm pretty sure I asked him why he was doing what he was doing, but I don't remember exactly what he said. I believe it was along the lines of just replacing the gifts with better ones in my sled. I believed whatever he said though. He walked out the back door with 3 boxes, came back momentarily to grab more, then left once again. He came back in and patted me on the back and told me not to tell my parents that I saw him. I smiled and agreed, and he took off with the boxes. I waited for him to come back with the replacement gifts, but he never did. I eventually went up to tell my parents despite what he said. When my parents realized I wasn't joking, they sat up in shock and fear and ran past me downstairs. When they saw half the presents were gone and the back door was left wide open, my mom screamed like a deranged person. I remember my parents were practically scolding me, demanding for me to describe the person who entered our house. Of course, being 5 years old, the description I gave was anything but useful. All I probably told them was that he was tall. It's been almost 15 years now though, and at this point for me, being that I was only 5 years old, it's nothing but a story to tell, rather than a bad memory at all. Did you ever used to have a fear of those guys who would dress up as Santa Claus in the mall or at Christmas parties? Up until the age of about 8, I certainly did. I think I was 6 or 7 years old when me and my mom were walking through the mall with all of the Christmas festivities and decorations up. Festive bands playing jingle bells, a giant tree in the center of the mall, and of course a mall Santa sitting in a chair covered by a green blanket. There was a small line of kids and parents waiting to sit on the Santa's lap, maybe 2 or 3 kids. My mom insisted I sat on his lap. Normally it would be the other way around, the kid begging the parent to sit on the lap, but she knew how shy I was. There wasn't anyone by the mall Santa's side, like one of those people who calls the next child up. It was just him. When I sat on the stranger's lap, he grabbed me by the chest and said softly in my ear, "What do you want for Christmas?" I think I said a Game Boy Advance. He laughed and assured me I would receive one. Then, for whatever reason, my mom walked up to the Santa and said something quietly to him. He chuckled in response to whatever she said and then said no problem. My mom told me to wait there by the Santa for a few minutes until she came back. At this point, there were no more kids waiting to sit on his lap, so his attention was directed at me. He told me to come over and sit on his lap again. I somehow obeyed, despite my fear of Santa Claus. When I sat on his lap, he pulled me closer to him so that my back was leaning on him. When I think back on this moment now, it's all the more painful and creepy. He then whispered in my ear that he had a Game Boy Advance outside by his sled, and if I followed him, I would get it right now and wouldn't have to wait until Christmas. My fear suddenly turned to excitement as I believed him. We both stepped off the chair, and I followed him down one of the exit hallways, but halfway through, he stopped and told me we should take a bathroom break first. We stepped into the bathroom, and he quickly locked the door. I turned and looked at him as he looked at me. But before anything else could happen, there was a frantic banging at the door. Somebody on the other side was yelling to open up. The Santa opened the door and a man pulled him out and shoved him. The man then escorted me back to the center of the mall, asking me where my mom went. I watched as a fake Santa casually walked out the exit door and out of my sight. When my mom came back, the man explained everything. I'm pretty sure he was watching the whole time. So he and my mom asked around to see if the mall hired any mall Santas for the day. They did not. Whoever that was just a pervert dressed as Santa to get kids to sit on his lap and possibly wait for a perfect opportunity to snatch one, just like he almost did me. This story took place about 5 years ago on Christmas Eve night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had just finished placing presents under the tree. I went upstairs to brush up and everything, then came back downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water before bed. My son Jake, who was 4 at the time, was standing by the stairs leading to the basement. I asked him what he was doing up so late. He pointed down the stairs and said, "Santa." I picked him up and carried him back to his room. I took a glass of water and went to bed. I woke up around an hour later to my son running down the hall outside my room. I sighed and got out of bed. As I was going down the stairs, I saw Jake by the tree looking at presents. Then he ran past me into the basement stairs again. He pointed down the stairs again. This time I looked down the stairwell, and my heart dropped as I saw a black figure sitting on the bottom step. I almost screamed, but I somehow held it in. I pulled my son quietly away from the basement door and closer to the front door of the house. I moved my hand away from my son's mouth to reach for the lock in the doorknob. I tried to pull the door open as quietly as possible, but it was pointless. The squeaky hinges let out the usual ear-piercing screeches, and I cringed in my mouth and eyes as I did. Suddenly, there were heavy stomps coming from up the basement stairs. I screamed and pushed open the storm door and practically threw Jake outside. I shut both doors behind us and we ran to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell as fast as possible, probably 30 times before they answered. After that, we went inside and stayed there and waited for the police. Whoever that person was gone though, as determined after the police conducted a thorough investigation of the house. I ended up lying to Jake, telling him that actually was Santa Claus, but a few years later, he remembered the incident and became a little more wise to what actually happened.
It's gonna be 13 minutes. So how many videos are gonna be in each part? There's 7 videos, and maybe um maybe per uh, two per part, 2 videos per part. So 3, but there's 7. So 3 videos part 1, 2 videos part 2, and 2 videos part 3. Yeah, we had 2 pauses, so We're still in part 1. There's gonna be 3 videos. So now there's 10 videos. So this is our uh second video in part 1. Let's begin. Oh yeah, I forgot. Okay. Yeah. There's three
Meeting my
stories.
ex-girlfriend's family during the holidays was the worst weekend of my life. They lived in a different state than my ex Kaylee and I. We were on Long Island in New York. They were all the way up in Vermont. Our relationship was still kind of new, but she seemed to think it was serious enough for her parents to invite the two of us up there for Christmas. Kaylee had a really small family, so apparently it would be just the two of us, her brother, and her parents. Pulling up to the house was a pleasant surprise. The house was beautiful and it stood on a huge, well-kept property secluded from any other houses. As Kaylee and I got out of my truck, her parents came out to the porch to greet us. First impressions, they seemed friendly and weird, an unexplainable type of friendly. The father didn't smile, but he shook my hand, patted me on the back, and said it was great to meet me. The mother hugged me, showing a lot more emotion, but something about her face was a bit off-putting. She had a really wide smile that seemed a bit exaggerated. The house was as beautiful inside as it was outside. It had a wooden lodge type atmosphere to it. A little while later, I met Katie's brother Paul, who got home from work. He was a really socially awkward dude. He had a bowl cut and had a whole tattoo sleeve running up his arm. We had dinner, which was awkward at certain moments, but other than that, it was kind of normal. After dinner, we watched a Christmas movie in the living room. I tried not to make eye contact, but I could tell Paul kept looking at me for extended periods of time, on a few different occasions. At one point, I finally looked back at him, and we locked eyes for like 3 seconds before he turned back to the TV. He was giving me the most judgmental stare I'd ever seen, and it made me only more uncomfortable. At the end of the night, Kaylee and I were in the guest room, which had an attached bathroom. Kaylee was in the bathroom. She left her phone on the nightstand. I saw she got a text from her mom, and for some reason, feeling a bit snoopy, I got up to read it. It was not at all what I was expecting, and it changed the whole night completely. Briefly on the screen, it said, "Text from mom. Do you think he suspects anything yet?" But the message quickly switched to new message, I'm guessing because she had iMessage notifications set to hide once the phone locks. I wanted to read what was said before that, but her phone had a password, unfortunately. I could actually feel my heart pumping now. Kaylee came back into the room. I kind of gave her the cold shoulder because my mind was racing. She seemed to notice. She was texting on her phone for a bit before turning out the lamp and going to sleep. I couldn't sleep though. I was rolling around for hours wondering what that text meant, and if it was about me. And what the hell was up with her brother? It was exactly 2 in the morning when I heard Kaylee get out of bed, but she was doing so very quietly. Normally I'd find this to be a kind gesture, but under the circumstances, I was finding this suspicious now.
That looks disturbing.
I didn't move. I pretended to still be asleep. I heard her come to my side of the bed and stand there for a few moments, then leaving the room and walking downstairs. Then I heard someone else walking downstairs, and then another person. Something was going on. I went over to the top of the stairs to listen to what was going on downstairs. There was a bunch of talking, but in very low voices. I walked down a few stairs quietly. The talking was coming from the dining room by the stairs. It sounded like they were planning something. I heard Kaylee say something like, "When I go back up, you stand by the door." Then I heard her brother say something, but what was going on was really starting to hit me in the face, or at least what I think was going on. I went back to the room to grab my stuff and leave. As I was grabbing the keys, I noticed something in the corner of the room. I turned the lamp on, which exposed Kaylee's dad sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, blank expression on his face behind his glasses, staring at me. I screamed at least 4 times, "You're all crazy," as I ran to my car. I put the car in drive practically before the car was even fully on and floored it out of that long driveway back to the road. I didn't stop once except for gas, and at that gas stop I checked my phone and saw Kaylee texted me saying, "What the f happened?" I didn't respond, not until later that night when I got home.
Should bleep that
I said,
part out.
"I don't know what you and your sick family were
Okay.
planning on doing to me. I don't want to know. Don't ever contact me or come near me again, and I won't report this." I said this only because I knew there was no proof at all of what happened, or what might have been about to happen. She never replied.
Yeah.
It was Christmas Eve night, 1 in the morning, because I always like to stay up extra late on Christmas Eve. To make things more festive and cozy feeling, it was during a snowstorm. I left the window open and the backyard light on just so I could also have the view of the snow in the backyard. I was focused on the TV at the moment, but through my peripheral vision, I thought I could briefly see something in the backyard. I turned to the window, but besides the falling snow, there was nothing going on out there. Still, I got up and went to the window just to be sure. Nothing. I sat back down on the couch, but now I was constantly checking the window to see if anything was outside. About 10 minutes later, I calmed down and forgot about it and reverted my full attention back to the movie. Then I heard, loud and clear, the backyard gate slam shut. Now I almost knew someone was back there. I slipped on my shoes and a jacket and went out to the backyard to check it out. There were boot marks in the snow leading from one gate across the yard to the other gate. I was not feeling brave enough to follow them, so I went back inside. As I was taking off my boots and jacket, I saw a track of wet, muddy snow on the den carpet, leading from the office to the hallway that led to the living room. That was also the way to my parents' room. First, I had to go to the office to see how they broke in, so I followed the boot marks to the office without turning on any lights to make my presence known. I was expecting to see one of the windows busted open, but everything was intact. Then I realized the boot marks didn't start in this room. They ended in this room. I slowly lifted my head up to the garage door in the corner of the room. It was open, and right under the doorway, there was someone in a winter coat, jeans, and boots, squatting down as if trying to hide, back facing me, but his head turned to look at me. I stood there with my mouth open in horror for a few seconds before I ran for it to my parents' room, screaming the whole way there. I got my dad to come out as quickly as possible, and on our way to the garage together, we heard the actual garage door opening. By the time we got there, the intruder was gone. Realistically, we could have followed his boot marks, but who knows how far he'd gotten by that point. We found out he broke in through an unlocked living room window. Just goes to show, if somebody has intentions of breaking into your house, They'll find a way, which is why you should always lock all your doors and windows.
Story 3.
I'm the oldest of 4, and during the events of this story, I was 16, my younger sister was 11, and my 2 younger brothers were 8 and 7. My parents and their group of friends were a part of a club that was basically for rich, snobby people. The club always hosted a Christmas party one night in December each year at a big fancy firehouse. Of course, for all the younger kids, like my siblings, somebody would always dress up as Santa Claus and hand out the presents that were left in a sack by a chair, which had a red blanket over it. This year, my dad's best friend Michael was dressing up as Santa. He was sitting at the same table as us, so when the time came for him to leave and get changed into the Santa suit, I saw him get up and walk out the door. There were like 20 young kids there, they never noticed. Everyone was having a good time, chatting and whatnot, kids playing on the floor in the center of the room, when the door to the firehouse opened and bells were heard jingling. All the kids jumped up yelling Santa, and in came Michael in a surprisingly unimpressive Santa costume. It honestly looked like the cheapest thing he could find at Party City. A serious downgrade from last year. The hat and the beard were alright, but the costume just seemed cheap. Not the usual costume the club supplied. He chuckled and did his best Santa impression. I had to say, he was doing a really good job of changing his voice though. I saw a few of my parents' friends whispering to each other. Michael grabbed the bag of gifts and said in his best Santa voice he'd be right back with the presents. He sounded so different though. He walked out the door with the bag of gifts. That's when my dad and a couple other guys ran after him yelling, "Hey." I still didn't know what was going on. Not until my mom told me that wasn't Michael. I wanted to feel important, I guess, so I ran outside to the parking lot as well, where I found my dad and 2 other guys standing there, looking around dumbfounded. The man dressed as Santa was gone. The real thing they were concerned about was where Michael was. Michael's car was also missing. I asked them if they were sure that wasn't Michael. They were all positive though. We tried calling Michael, but his phone was off. We tried his house phone after a while too, which went to voicemail. We had to send a search party, but we couldn't find him anywhere though. Eventually my dad and I returned to the firehouse to pick up my mom and siblings. Just about everyone went home by then. I waited outside. I heard a scream for help in the distance. It came from the woods, deep in the woods. I ran to the tree line to scream back Michael's name. He yelled back help again. It was him. I was too excited to go back for my dad, so I ran into the woods following his screams for help, and I found him, tied to a tree in a bloody mess. Blood was dripping from his forehead down to his face. He looked like he'd been beaten by a blunt object. I cut the little rope with my key, and he struggled to his feet. I walked him back to the parking lot, and he screamed when he saw his car was gone. When Michael left the building planning to get changed into the Santa costume, he was jumped by 3 guys wearing masks, one of whom struck him in the forehead with something metal repeatedly until he was knocked out. Next thing he knew, he woke up tied to a tree in the woods. It's sick to think that 3 or 4 men could have set up a plan like this, involving harming somebody just to steal a bunch of gifts from children, some of them pretty expensive. And to add insult to injury, they stole Michael's $50,000 car. I felt terrible for him, and I still do. It's not the kind of story that he can just bring up for fun. It's still a painful story to tell, even for me.
Yeah. This video right here is one of the new ones that you sent me, which we're gonna watch at the end. Wait, hold on. Okay. So yeah, that is uh, part one. And yeah, there's gonna be two videos per part. So see you in part two.